Hi, Rick. How are you?
Awesome, Carl. How are you?
I'm good. Welcome to the Carl and Rick Talk Risk podcast. I think we're on episode 8 or 9 now. And we're going to do something a little different today. We are going to do our first book review slash article review. And we decided we want to focus on a recent central bank governor, Canadian central bank, Stephen Poloz. He came out with a book, I believe it was 2022 during the pandemic, on the age of uncertainty. And he pointed at 5 different trends that we'll see play out in the next couple of decades that companies, investors, and families need to be on top of to understand where the future's headed. Uh, First, let's talk about the trends a little bit. He's got 5 of them: aging workforce, mounting debt. I would say some of these are more relevant to Canada than some other countries. Rising income inequality. The fourth one is AI slash technological advancement, and the fifth one is climate change. And of course, Rick, you could have guessed it. My ears pricked up at the very first one, aging workforce, because as you know, I wrote an article for Premier's Intelligent Risk, um, February issue coming out next week, about the one of the biggest risks of all that I don't think is talked enough about, and that's demographic risk. It's the it ties in perfectly with what Stephen is talking about in his book. And just to give the synopsis quickly, it's the risk that smaller and smaller generations at the bottom of the population pyramid aren't able to replace the workforces that the older workforces. So you don't have enough people paying into pension systems. You don't have enough workers to fill jobs. You've got a whole host of implications, and I go through them in my article on your political structure, social changes, economic. And I talk mainly in that article about the forerunner in this trend, which is Japan. Japan has fascinating demographics that seem to be one step ahead of everybody else, possibly in a bad way. And they are facing up to some of these challenges, and also trying to figure them out. And the interesting thing I think about Japan is, unlike Canada, the US, and a lot of European countries, they don't want to rely on immigration to fill that gap. You can actually tell that because in the news this week, they launched a digital nomad visa. Rick, I don't know if you heard about these, but during the pandemic, they were pretty big. They were a way of getting people out from their remote workspace at home and into, Fiji or Costa Rica, and they would come there, spend their hard currency in the local economy and boost those economies, but they would still be working for firms across the world. But you look at Japan's digital nomad visa, which is about 2 or 3 years late to hit that trend, and also you need 70,000 US dollars a year to qualify for it. Then you can only stay 6 months. You have to leave at the end of that, and you can reapply after another 6 months. So they make the bar so high that it's like, yeah, we'll make the visa, but we don't really want you to show up. But getting back to Stephen Poloz's book, and my article, he talks more about a shrinking workforce, which workforces haven't peaked in Canada or America or a lot of other countries. They will peak in the Netherlands in a couple of years, so that'll be quite interesting. They'll start facing what Japan is already facing, um, and yeah, they'll have to start thinking through these things and making hard decisions. But Rick, what caught your attention about Stephen's book?
First off, there's just a whole host to go through on his 5 risks, and in particular the aging. Um, just want to pick up quickly on something that you said about Japan, and perhaps we can pick up this thread later in the conversation. Uh, in the late 90s, the early, let me back up. In the late 80s, when I went through business school, of course, we were all going to be working for the Japanese. That was that was almost a given. And then, of course, Japan hit that demographic wall, and has been de facto in a slump ever since, and kind of overstating the case, has been economically nowhere, relatively speaking, or certainly a long, long, long ways away from where they were in the 80s. And I was always of the view that because of demographics, that was going to happen in North America in roughly 15 years' time. But of course, what we've seen is we've just seen a huge onslaught of immigration, which, of course, as you pointed out, is not part of the Japanese culture and or strategy per se. So, I think that that's very, very, very interesting, which, of course, a very different strategy. Just talking at a very high level about the book. First off, I loved the book. Okay. I've read a lot of books by former, central bank governors. This reads absolutely nothing like them. This one is actually a fun read. You don't need massive doses of coffee. It's written in a very conversational tone. In fact, all you can think of, or when you're reading the book, is, gee, I'd like to sit down and have a refreshing beverage with this guy. And the book kind of reads, kind of like you're doing that. It's almost like you and I going back and forth, although, he's a lot more coherent. And he really pulls in and one of the ways he does this is it really pulls in the personal aspects. So each of the chapters begins with something very personal from his life or his upbringing or whatnot, and then he relates it to the economic factor that he's talking about. The other thing about this book is, the new age of uncertainty, is he stresses, and I love this, finally, someone else, he stresses the upside as well as the downside of risk, the upside as well as the downside of volatility. And this is something, of course, has been a passion of mine for so long. So, I couldn't help but be biased with this book. This is a book that for me hit the sweet spot. It was technical enough that you could get into the details, the second, third, and fourth layer of arguments, but without being so dry or so mathematically dense. In fact, I don't think that there was a single equation in the entire book. So I highly, highly, highly recommend the book from that view. If nothing else, risk can be good, uncertainty can be good.
I know there's no risk, there's no mathematical models in the book, because one of the interviews I watched to prepare for our chat today, they spoke about Ray Dalio's latest book versus Stephen Poloz's, and how more readable Stephen Poloz's was. And the comment was most people would wait for the Ray Dalio movie to come out.
Not only is this book readable, but it's actually enjoyable.
Yeah.
It truly is an enjoyable book. It is very thought provoking. So it's not fluff. It's not fluff, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I really enjoy the way Stephen Poloz sort of answers questions, because he like you say, he gives another layer of complication. Well, it's not obviously a good thing. These are all the possible downsides of it. So he really, he's almost a central bank philosopher in a way, because he's giving you the context and why they care so much about certain measures or indicators. So very interesting take on everything. Yeah, and he won the National Business Book Award for this in 2023. So, a lot of admirers clearly.
Getting back to the aging, there's one other
Yeah.
aspect about the aging. You talked about the demographics of it. Okay. One of the things I used to talk about in risk seminars, which by the way, he does bring this aspect up, but in risk seminars, I always used to complain that the risk department was the retirement home.
Right.
John or Susie has 5 years to go till retirement. They basically outlived their usefulness in the organization, but they have a lot of knowing where all the skeletons are, where all the boogeymen are. So let's put them in risk.
Yeah.
And, I used to argue strongly against that because we need to bring in those who perhaps have more techniques, more knowledge, to be quite frank, more energy, more willingness to experiment, try new things. I'm now coming a little bit full circle on that, in that we actually, one of the things that Poloz doesn't stress as much as I think he should have is that the gray hairs have a lot of institutionalized knowledge. And they also have a lot of intuitive knowledge
Mm-hmm.
that isn't captured by AI. And, one of the huge advantage, one of the best things I ever did in my career was when I got my first major promotion. Um, I actually had was much more senior person as my right hand person.
Mm-hmm.
And while the working relationship was a little bit weird at first, because they were basically 25 years older than I was, uh, that proved to be invaluable because having them kind of whisper in my ear, having them kind of prep me for meetings about what the historical context was, having them tell me, perhaps you might want to restrain the enthusiasm on this or dial up
Mm-hmm.
the enthusiasm on that. That was absolutely invaluable. And ironically, a little later in my career, I didn't have that. And boy, did I learn the value of that. So that's one aspect of the aging demographics that he does not that I wish he would have embellished a little bit more in the book. Overall,
Yeah.
I loved the book. I thought it was uh, one of the best economics books I've read. Period. Top five economics related books I've read. Period.
Wow. Nice. Yeah. I want to touch on one more thing. I heard him talk about, actually be questioned on at the interview I watched, and that was the distance between central banks and everyday people and how they feel about certain topics, and in particular, inflation was brought up.
Yeah.
How inflation's apparently running at 3% in Canada. Um, and but some businesses feel like it's 20 or 30% for what they do.
And if you
Um,
listen to the news, the person on the street thinks it's 300%. But
yeah.
anyhow,
Yeah, exactly. It's easy for these things to get exaggerated, and yeah, the way he answered it was very good. I think he explained what is and isn't inflation, and he could do this because he speaks to a lot of business owners and individuals. I think he has a very good common touch in the way he goes about his work. He's not a technocrat that just fiddles with models. It comes through in the writing and it comes through in the book.
yeah.
But he really helps. He definitely helped the audience at this interview understand what causes inflation, what takes away from it, how it persists over time, how it dissipates. Um, and I'm not sure he comforted the business owner who was asking the question, but we see these statistics in the news so much, and we get caught up and hyped up by certain personalities. But he gave a very even keeled and explanatory view of it. So yeah. Yeah, so I think maybe let's end it there. If you haven't already, go out and read Stephen Poloz's new book. It's instructive on a lot of the challenges we're facing, many of which we talk about almost every episode, Rick, AI and mounting debt. So yeah, go and read it. And next week, if you're interested, read my article on the demographic risk that we're facing and the implications of it for social, economic, and other factors. You can also always subscribe to this channel and get new videos whenever they come available, and comment on videos. We'd love to hear from anyone that's watching. All right. Thanks, Rick. As always, we'll chat with you next week.
Thanks, Carl. Have fun. Have a great week.